Guys, real quick about airless paint spraying versus rolling and some of the misconceptions of airless. A lot of people seem to think you put on less paint when you use an airless paint sprayer, which may be true in some circumstances, but most of the time that's not true. Usually you put on more, and let's talk about that real quick. It depends on a couple of things. One, it depends on the size of the sprayer. This is a Titan 440 old XC. The new ones are 440i. I have no reason to replace this rig because it works perfectly fine and it's rebuildable and runs for years and years. Titan is one of the best rigs on the market. Some people will say Graco is, but when you can rebuild this bottom part of this rig for super cheap and buy a new piston for $40 versus a Graco is like $200. Often they get rebuilt much more often and last a lot longer. So the reason why it can be heavier, and usually it is depending on the size of the rig. So this is a 0.55 gallons per minute rig, which typically people call it a half a gallon a minute spray rig. It's capable of taking paint straight out of the can without any water, and so it's super thick, and puts it on the surface and lays it on the surface, and it's capable of a 19 thousandths or 21 thousandths tip. I wouldn't say it says it's capable of 23 thousandths, but honestly, if you're going to be pushing it to a decent amount of pressure, 19 thousandths is really about as far as you want to go with this rig. So, what does that mean? It's technical terms. Is really you can put on the paint so heavy that you couldn't put it on as heavy with a roller. If you put it on as thick as you could, and that roller, when it rolls over, it takes paint back off of the wall or surface that you're putting it on. A substrate would be the right word for that. So it could be a wall, it could be a door, it could be anything, whatever that substrate is. The roller will take more paint back off. So in that respect, the airless paint sprayer puts it on a lot heavier than the roller. In fact, you can go through a lot more material, put on a lot heavier coat with the airless than you can with a roller. Now, how does that differ? Sometimes people can put it on lighter with an airless paint sprayer. Okay, how can you do that? Well, instead of using a 19 thousandths, which is the opening of the hole for the spray tip, because they have numbers like 6, 19, 5, 17, 5, 15, the 15 would be the 15 thousandths. So if somebody uses a 4 or 5, 13 thousandths tip, and then what they do is they water down the paint, okay, and they can dust it and make it look covered with a lot less material. So what it comes down to is you really need to trust the person doing your job. So there are a lot of ways to cheat in painting and still make things look good but not last. So one of the other things I'm going to show you guys is about rolling. Now, when is it, typically, if you're a good painter, it really only takes you about 20% more time to roll something. So let's say a 5-day job will be a 7-day job if you're rolling, except if you're talking about eaves or something like that, then it might be a little bit longer than that because you're working with your hand over your head, so that tends to slow you down. But typically walls, 20% more time. When would it be a good idea to roll? There's a couple things that can happen when you're spraying with an airless, because what's happening is the spray is going onto the surface and it lays on the top of the surface, where a roller will actually agitate what's underneath. Now, let's say you have a questionable surface, you've cleaned the surface, as much as you can, and you wipe it still, and there's a little bit of like a residue, what they call chalk, or some sort of where the paint is coming, it's breaking down. Now, the thing that's good about rolling is because you're rolling over the surface, you're agitating that stuff up, and sometimes you're able to lift some of it off and mix it into the paint, where the paint might stick a little bit better on those type of surfaces. Typically, the right thing to do would be use a primer and back roll, because then the primer is going to hold the material and also get it to agitate it in, and then get that stuff to stick, to make that surface a better surface to paint over. So those are times when you want to roll. Other things that you can use to roll are, if you have like a brand new drywall and stuff like that, the paint will lay on the surface with the sprayer, where if you roll it, usually we will spray and back roll. So one guy will just spray and the other person will follow him with a roller, to get it to push into to lay into the surface a little bit and get that to look a little bit better, so you don't have those spray marks that you can get sometimes if you have an enamel surface, if you're using an enamel on brand new drywall. If you're using flat paint, typically you can get that to work without having to use a back roll. So those are a couple of things to talk about Airless. If you're looking at buying one or renting one, look for the larger one. You can get those ones for a couple $100 that are 0.25 gallons per minute, and really, honestly, you're going to have to water your paint down to run it through that rig. So you need to spend about $800 or more and try and get a half a gallon per minute rig minimum, so that you're able to do a decent job with your Airless. So those are just a couple of heads up on misconceptions on Airless, comparing Airless to rolling, and a couple of ideas for you guys that are still learning how to paint.